Hello and welcome to a new episode of Velocity Kinetics and my wonky camera angles because I can't be bothered to buy a new phone case. So, I want to do a quick discussion around Andretti being rejected by F1 as a new team. Now, I know before I start doing this, people are like, well, why are you using your phone and phone case and so on? Bearing in mind, I've talked about having a new 4K Pentax camera, or at least I did in a video. It may or may not have come out now. I'm a bit of a mix as to where I am in my release schedule with everything. Issue with that is the camera film, when my computer can render the frames together, the footage is really good. But because my computer's quite old, it can't render the footage quick enough, and it's why I think some footage I've got is a bit choppy. So, for example, the car coming down the hill as part of our new introduction piece, that footage was always choppy when it went on the computer, and even then, when it did go on that computer, computer was a year, 18 months newer, so to speak. But I'll do that at some point, because I did record a video. We answer AWD versus 4WD. The footage was too choppy to use, and then when I was trying to put it together, when I thought, oh, I'll just persist with the choppiness, I brain farted hard halfway through that video. I knew I'd lost my train of thought, but I hadn't realised just how badly it was. So that one will be redone. Anyway, on to Andretti. So for those who may not know, Andretti had applied to be a new team in F1 along with a few others. I don't remember the name of the others off the top of my head, and if they were that memorable, then I would remember them. But I do believe there was a couple of teams based out of Asia. It might even call Racing Asia, if I remember rightly, or Pantera or something like that, maybe. No, Pantera's a metal band. Anyway, there were a few teams. Andretti was the only one, in my opinion, with any real credibility in terms of name, resources, clout, whatever you want to call it. It had the best. It reminded me a bit like Haas. It had the best foundations. When Haas came in, I wasn't completely against, because Haas running things in Indian NASCAR, even if it was just a name on the side of the car, he still had some understanding of it. So FIA approved Andretti's application. Formula One and the commercial rights holder have rejected that application. That, in my opinion, is quite short-sighted. They have cited that it would dilute the pocket money. Well, it is pocket money, prize money. It would dilute the prize money. If Andretti doesn't perform, then it is another team that runs a risk of being consigned to history as a poor performer. And then if they did come in for 2025, you've got new rules in 2026 that they then got to build to. At least that's what F1 and Liberty Media have cited, which, isn't unfair. It is an uphill challenge. And I was watching a video this morning by the race, and it wasn't Glenn Freeman who was presenting it. I can't remember the guy's name, but Scott Mitchell-Mum was also on the video as well. But in that video, they said, well, hang on, this is a bit hypocritical, regardless of where you stand on the Andretti scale. The fact that they declined it with that reason, Haas was allowed in for the same reason, as in Haas came in 2016, one rule set, 2017, new rule set. And Haas, Haas performed and continued to kind of perform, and they did do the rule change. But then again, thinking about it, having heard that video from the race, yeah, they're not wrong. The hypocrisy is astounding. It absolutely reeks. Whatever words you want to use, it is redonkulous. But you could argue, because Haas were buying as many bits as they could from Ferrari, that actually Haas did not have to develop as much from the ground up, whereas Andretti's got to build that all from the ground up. The underlying tone of the rejection, so I'm just trying to do my work at the same time as I do this video, the underlying reason for the rejection is basically also kind of hinted at as if they'd come in with a proper GM entry in the form of the engine. So if GM weren't rebranding a Renault engine, then their application would have likely been accepted, which isn't entirely unfair. If you're bringing a new manufacturer in, regardless of whether you're talking a powerhouse like GM, whether you're talking someone smaller like, unlikely I appreciate, but even if it was, say, a Volvo or a Mazda or someone like that coming in fully, even Peugeot coming back, then you've got something to think about, because that's another manufacturer interested in Formula One, and not just some privateer style entry like the rest of the Andretti outfit would be, a la Williams and so on and so forth. However, if Andretti could score points with the Renault engine, you can't help but think, if I was in Alpine/Renault's position, I would be protesting because of potential lost income, being able to sell the engine and potentially the gearbox if they want the gearbox, assuming Renault builds their own and don't just buy it in, and other bits of the ERS system as well. You'd think Renault/Alpine would protest it, to say, well, hang on, we've lost income, we were banking on that to help us improve. But then again, you don't want Renault don't necessarily, you could also argue from Renault's perspective, they don't want a back marker running around with their engine in the back not performing, potentially being blamed, much like they were with Red Bull, for not performing very well because of the engine, and then not having another customer. So potentially, the only other teams that would potentially look to change engine supplier, Haas could potentially change to Renault, unlikely to deviate from Ferrari, but they could change to Renault. They're, like I say, privateer. Williams could go back to Renault. McLaren could go back to Renault. Actually, I quite like the McLaren-Renault partnership, but that's just me. I'm trying to think who else could. Red Bull/AlphaTauri could go back to Renault. Unlikely, but they could. But from Renault's perspective, they need to keep prospective customers interested. So it's a bit of a catch-22 there. Andretti, it's a good name for the sport. And it's not like they've just tried to buy the rights to a different name. They're not done a Tony Fernandez and bought the team, allegedly, the rights to Team Lotus. It's not like they're allegedly buying the rights to the Team Lotus name and then getting stroppy when they don't get the results, which is what Tony Fernandez was in a nutshell. So it's not like they've tried to buy the rights to Brabham, to Tyrrell, for example, big names of the past, or Van Wall trying to do another Lotus, for example. You name all different teams that have won races over the years. It's not like they're trying to come in with a name that they've purchased under questionable circumstances. They will do their best as they can, and don't forget, Andretti is putting his name on the line. Both father and son are putting their name on the line to perform. So for Andretti, it's actually quite a lot online by being willing to stick their name on it. The fact that General Motors had backed them and were intending to bring in their own engine in 2028, I think was the plan to do it for or by, I can't remember what the wording is. That they've, F1 as a whole, I think, have missed an opportunity. But something F1 has also, in my opinion, quite short-sightedly forgotten. There is no Minardi team anymore. And before you go, someone sits and goes, well, actually, I think you'll find that Minardi is still there because of Red Bull purchasing Toro Rosso, which became Scuderia AlphaTauri, which has become Visa Cash App RB2.468 clone. Or Dave, we'll just call it Dave. People haven't thought. What I mean is, there's no Super Junior team that's just. I appreciate F1 teams, even Minardi and the latter of Jordan when they were towards the end of their time in F1. They weren't there just to make up the numbers. They were there because they believed they could score points, that they could challenge, and so on. But there is no backmarket team that relies on new talent coming through and keeping the reason to progress through the ranks, if that makes sense. If you look back in earlier in the decade, we had the likes of HRT, Marussia, and Lotus Racing, Caterham, whatever they'll call themselves, there were some new drivers coming through. Sauber now changing to Audi. Audi won't necessarily want to take a punt on a newbie unless it's a newbie they've backed. They'll want proven talent in that car. Could you imagine Ferrari signing an absolute noob? In their eyes, signing an absolute noob for a race seat. Even the likes of Jules Bianchi and Charles Leclerc, who have shown intense amounts of promise, in fact, Leclerc being there. But whilst, they all did their time in poor performing machinery. Even if the Andretti effort just results in a poor performing car, even if it's just for a couple of years whilst they're just finding their feet, you could put a couple of rookies in there, whether that's IndyCar drivers coming over to try their hand at F1, whether you're going to take from the Formula 2 and 3 ranks, whether you're going to do something crazy and maybe pull someone over from WEC, whether you're going to take a punt on someone from there. There's a lot of different ways around it. But given that this off-season has been the only time in Formula 1 history where there's been no change of driver on the grid, that the only time that whilst, and I don't even think people have really have changed teams, virtually everything is the same, it does stink for those on their way up. It does not bode well. It does not offer much encouragement for them. It must be quite disheartening that you're doing all this through the lower formula just to get nowhere. Even if you're fantastic at open wheel racing, I imagine that going to WEC or endurance or just general endurance closed wheel racing is not the same. Although if you've got the natural speed, surely you can drive anything fast. You've also got the weird situation of a lot of drivers being locked in for a long time. Before you go, what the hell are you talking about this for when you're talking about Andretti? I will get there in just a second. You've got a lot of drivers who have now locked in for a long time, so there are a lot of seats that are effectively blocked. So whether you're talking about just a general mix-up of people going to here, there and everywhere, or whether you're looking at an opportunity for new people to filter through, it's gone. An 11th team, in my opinion, and a 12th, wouldn't be a bad move at all. I wouldn't necessarily like a senior and a junior team relationship like what Red Bull and Dave will have, but that doesn't mean there can't be someone trying to be technically aligned. Not like someone can't try and technically align themselves to Alpine by using the engine, the gearbox and rear suspension components, if I believe the rear suspension components are allowed to be bought. You could use someone who uses a lot of that same kit. If another manufacturer wanted to take the punt, I'm surprised, within all that, I'm surprised BMW hasn't tried to consider a comeback, given their past history in Formula 1, which is not a bad history, quite illustrious compared to many that have tried. So trying to bring it back round to Andretti before I twang my chair against my desk and get stuck, F1's missed a brilliant opportunity, not just to increase their potential audience from getting more people from America interested, get more revenue, again, the Americans, but by getting more talent in, regardless of where it's from, by getting more talent, more engineers involved. And even if, say for instance, if Haas, with this change that's happened with Gunther Steiner leaving and new technical leadership coming in and new team principal, if Haas suddenly fall off the grid, then you'd still have 10 teams, is sort of my feeling on the matter. It's like they're being quite short-sighted, especially looking at how survivalist Haas is. Now, granted, you could say, well, they're not survivalist because if they were survivalists, they'd still be running rookies. And you're not entirely wrong in that stance, but they haven't gotten on top of things for a long time. I personally felt Andretti was a good move to join. I did admittedly worry that it was just a cash grab on Andretti's front, to try and get shareholders interested in his business and to try and get money from various places to build. Not. I don't mean that to paint the Andrettis as thieves or greedy, because I obviously don't know what they're like. But it wasn't. I always got the impression it was done because they love racing. They care about racing. We have let far worse onto the grid. That weird period in the 90s where some teams would pre-qualify once or twice in a year. Like, what was it, ATS, perhaps? If I'm remembering rightly. All those little teams that would come and go. Granted, you could buy a relatively competitive DFV off the shelf and stand a chance of being competitive. But look at how much of a bloody joke HRT were. They went from being Campos Meta, then rescheduled, then renamed themselves to HRT. They had changes in drivers before the team even turned a wheel. They turned up to their first race late, and the car having never turned a wheel. It was doing its shakedown effectively in practice in Bahrain when they turned up. Lotus Racing was arguably the only creditable team, because what they call themselves at the time, was it Man, or were they Virgin Racing at the time, had designed a car with CFD with too small a fuel tank that couldn't get to the end of the race. You had US F1 debacle that continued on, and we might turn, they might be able to, and then 2 or 3 races later, like, nah, not happening, unfolding. You know, we have let far less flushed out ideas onto the grid, and Andretti's seemed very thought through, and we shouldn't be, as a fan, we should be, whilst we all want a new manufacturer on the grid, and we'll have our own biases because of cars that we like and dislike. For instance, I'd love to see a Volvo engine on there. Not ever likely to happen, but I'd love to see something Swedish on there, even if it was Saab. I'd love to have seen something Swedish in there, or perhaps something from Peugeot again, or maybe even seeing someone like Hyundai having a crack at it. But we shouldn't just be holding on to a new effort because we want a new manufacturer. We want a new engine supply. We want this, we want that. If F1 had gotten to the dire straits of we've only got Ferrari or Mercedes power, then absolutely hold on for a new manufacturer, assuming that we haven't got an independent like Cosworth about to come in. F1 itself is quite a rich boy club. Make no sense about it. It is what it is, and keeping that elite club very elite is not good for the sport. Not to say that Andretti is an upstart, far from it, and it would suffer from the same thing of being an elitist thing. But it would open up that group. Andretti was a brilliant way to get another name, a link to a new manufacturer, even if it's just a big bit of branding, even if it is just a branding exercise on the Renault engine. That was getting General Motors / Cadillac on there. Wasn't what was a very good move. Or even if it's a case of, well, in the States, because Cadillac doesn't sell very well everywhere else, Cadillac will be the brand in the States, and so that other places where Cadillac is popular, and then change it to Chevrolet somewhere else. You know, they've got a big option, and then you had the option, at least now. Granted, you'd be saying, well, actually it's Renault versus Ford battle, but there'll be pissing wars about the advertising. You had the option to get Ford versus GM into Formula One, something I wanted a long time ago. Granted, I didn't know what brand I wanted to bring it in, and I believe I'd wrongly said that Dodge was part of General Motors and not the Chrysler group. But you know, or was I just talking I wanted more American stuff more American power in F1? I can't remember. But still, you had a brilliant opportunity to appeal to loads of people through the Ford versus GM battle. And F1 have been, in my opinion, so very short-sighted. I think that's probably the best way to sum up this whole Andretti thing. Formula One have been very short-sighted, in my opinion. The FIA, but it doesn't matter whether they say yes on... Well, if the FIA said no, it wouldn't have gotten anywhere, but the FIA doesn't hold any sway. I kind of hope Andretti does try to appeal it, because they're saying about them not being able to build 2 cars for the rules. Bear in mind, Andretti runs in Indy cars and Formula... I believe they still run a Formula E team. They did run some... What was the other category? Do they run something NASCAR as well? Andretti have got their fingers in many pies. They can cope with building multiple things. And it's not like it's just some mad person with a shed somewhere who thinks they can do it. Anyway, just my 2 cents. Please like and subscribe. Like the Facebook page. Please donate to paypal.me/VelocityKinetics. That will help us look at getting a proper web page and doing a decent merch store if we can. But until next time, drive safe, look after yourselves.